The twin suns of Zalara burned brightly over the shining palace of crystal and gold. Soldiers in silver armor lined the grand hall, their sharp eyes fixed on the massive doors that were about to open. Everyone knew who was coming. The human. The warrior from Earth. A tense silence spread across the hall as the heavy doors slid open with a deep metallic hiss. A single man stepped inside, his boots echoing softly against the polished floor. His name was Captain Elias Ward, the human soldier sent by the Terran Federation to form an alliance with the Zalaran Empire. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his uniform marked by scars of old battles. His face was calm, but his eyes, they carried storms. There was something ancient and broken in his gaze, like a man who had seen too many wars and lost too many friends. The alien guards stiffened as he walked past. Their bodies were strong, their skin a mix of blue and silver hues, but even they felt uneasy. Humans were not like them. They were fragile yet fierce, small yet terrifying in battle. There was something about their courage or madness that no other species could explain. At the end of the hall stood the High Emperor of Zalara, tall and regal, wearing robes that shimmered like water under the sun. Beside him stood his daughter, Princess Lyria, young, graceful, and ethereal. Her skin glowed softly like moonlight, and her eyes, deep violet, reflected the stars themselves. When Elias stepped closer and bowed, the Emperor gave a proud, formal nod. "Welcome, human of Earth, we have awaited your arrival." Elias lifted his head slowly. His voice was low but steady. "Your Majesty, it is an honor to stand before you." "I bring peace on behalf of my people," the hall whispered. Peace, a strange word from a species known for war. But before the Emperor could reply, a sudden trembling cry broke the silence. "Not him, Father." Every head turned. The princess had stepped back, fear flooding her face. Her lips shook, her voice almost breaking. "I'm afraid of that human warrior." Gasps spread through the hall. The Emperor's expression hardened slightly, but he placed a calming hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Lyria, enough." Yet she couldn't stop staring at Elias. Her heart raced painfully in her chest. His eyes, they were so human and yet not human at all. She had grown up hearing tales of the Earthborn soldiers, creatures of flesh and rage who fought entire armies and never surrendered. To her, humans were ghosts of war, monsters who smiled while surrounded by fire, and now one stood before her, chosen to protect her and possibly marry her. Elias did not move. His face didn't change, not even when she rejected him in front of everyone. His silence carried a strange kind of power, not pride, not anger, but understanding. He had seen fear before. He knew what it looked like. When he finally spoke, his tone was calm, almost gentle. "It's all right, Your Highness. I would be afraid too." His words struck her harder than any weapon. She expected arrogance, maybe even mockery. But his voice held something she did not understand. Sadness. The Emperor dismissed the court soon after. The guards led Elias to his quarters and the crowd dispersed, whispering rumors like fire spreading through dry grass. That night, the palace lights shimmered quietly under the twin moons, but Princess Lyria couldn't sleep. She kept seeing those eyes, not cruel, not violent, but heavy with pain. Why would a man so powerful look so broken? And somewhere far below her window, in a quiet chamber guarded by alien sentinels, Captain Elias Ward sat alone, removing his gloves. Faded scars crossed his hands, old burns, blade marks, reminders of battles long past. He stared at them silently, as if each mark whispered a story he could never tell. The galaxy called humans dangerous. Perhaps it was true. But Elias knew the truth hidden behind that fear. Humans were dangerous not because they loved war, but because they were the only ones who could survive it. The morning light poured into the humans' quarters through tall crystal windows. Elias stood there quietly, his hands behind his back, staring at the alien city beyond the glass. The spires of Zalara reached toward the sky like frozen waves of light. It was beautiful, too beautiful for a soldier who had spent half his life surrounded by fire. He heard footsteps behind him. A servant entered, bowing politely. "Captain Ward, the Emperor requests your presence in the Hall of Memories." Elias nodded once. "I'll be there." When he reached the great hall, the Emperor was waiting beside a long wall filled with glowing panels. Each panel displayed scenes of history, victories, treaties, and wars. The air smelled faintly of ancient incense. The Emperor spoke first. "Do you know why I called you here, human?" Elias stood tall. "To speak of the Alliance, Your Majesty." The Emperor turned toward the wall. "Yes, but also to speak of fear. My daughter, she sees terror in you, as do many of my people. You must understand why." Elias lowered his eyes. "Because of the war." The Emperor nodded slowly. "Yes, the War of Balthion. Our worlds remember it well. Millions died when humans arrived. Your armies fought like storms, merciless, endless. Even our machines failed against you." He turned to face the human directly. "You call yourselves protectors. But the galaxy remembers only the destruction." Elias did not argue. His voice came quiet but heavy. "Destruction was never our goal. We fought because we had no choice. The Balthion took our colonies, slaughtered civilians. We fought back until nothing was left to take." The Emperor studied him carefully. "You lost people." Elias gave a short nod. "Everyone loses people in war, Your Majesty. But humans, we lose pieces of ourselves too." There was silence. For the first time, the Emperor saw not a soldier, but a man. A man carrying a lifetime of pain behind his eyes. When the meeting ended, Elias walked through the palace gardens, trying to breathe. The scent of alien flowers filled the air, but even their sweetness could not erase the ghosts that followed him. He remembered his comrades, men and women who laughed under the stars before battles, who dreamed of going home. Now only their names remained, carved into metal plates buried under alien skies. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "You think too much, Captain." Elias turned. Princess Lyria stood behind him, wearing a silver cloak that shimmered in the sunlight. Her tone was cautious but not hostile. "My father says humans don't rest easily." Elias gave a faint smile. "Your father is wise." She hesitated, then asked softly, "Is it true what they say about you? That you destroyed an entire fortress alone?" He looked away. "I destroyed what was left of it. After the others were gone." Her voice trembled. "Why do you do it? Why keep fighting if it hurts so much?" He sighed, his gaze drifting toward the horizon. "Because someone has to. Because if we stop fighting, the next war will come for those who can't defend themselves." Lyria fell silent. She didn't understand humans. They were fragile creatures, soft-skinned, short-lived, and yet they faced death with a strange kind of courage that frightened her. She studied him quietly. His uniform was torn in places, his hands scarred, his eyes tired. But there was something noble in his weariness, something that made her chest tighten. "Do you hate us?" she asked finally. Elias shook his head. "No, I don't hate anyone anymore. Hate is what starts wars." There was a long pause between them, filled only by the gentle wind. Then Lyria spoke again, her voice small. "I was afraid of you." "I know," he said simply. "You still are." Her cheeks flushed. She looked down. "You're different from the stories." Elias smiled faintly. "Stories always forget the truth. They show the fire but never the hands that got burned." The princess looked at him one last time before walking away, her mind filled with questions she couldn't answer. And when she was gone, Elias exhaled deeply. For years he had carried the weight of what humans were. Warriors, monsters, heroes, or maybe all at once. But here, in this alien palace under two suns, he wondered for the first time if peace was something he could ever truly earn. Because sometimes, he thought, the hardest part of being human wasn't surviving the war. It was learning to live after it. The days after their meeting passed slowly, like soft rain over stone. Princess Lyria tried to go about her royal duties, attending council meetings, visiting the gardens, smiling at her people, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the human warrior. Every time she saw Captain Elias Ward, something stirred inside her chest. Fear, yes, but also curiosity. He never spoke much, never demanded attention, yet somehow his silence was louder than any voice in the palace. One morning, she saw him training in the courtyard. The twin suns glowed high above and the air shimmered with golden heat. Elias stood in the center, his jacket off, a heavy practice blade in his hands. The alien guards who trained nearby watched in awe as he moved, slow, controlled, precise. Every swing, every step was measured like poetry in motion. Lyria stood behind a pillar, unable to look away. There was no rage in his movements, only discipline and sorrow. His face was calm, but his eyes told a different story. They spoke of exhaustion, of promises kept through pain, of wars that left invisible scars. When he finished, he wiped sweat from his brow and looked toward her. Their eyes met for only a second, yet it was enough to make her heart jump. Embarrassed, she turned quickly and walked away, her thoughts spinning like wind. That night she sat on her balcony, staring at the distant stars. The city below glowed softly, a sea of light and crystal towers. Her hand rested over her chest as she whispered to herself, "Why does he make me feel this way?" She remembered the moment he arrived, the fear that gripped her heart when she saw him. That fear still lived inside her, but now it was mixed with something gentler, something confusing. Her maid entered quietly, holding a cup of warm drink. "You look troubled, my princess," she said softly. Lyria hesitated, then asked, "Do you think humans are truly monsters?" The maid blinked. "I've never met one before him, but he does not seem cruel." Lyria sighed, her eyes still on the stars. "No, he seems sad, like a warrior who lost everything." The maid smiled faintly. "Then perhaps he is not the monster, my lady. Perhaps he is the one who fought them." Those words stayed with her long after the maid left. The next day, during the royal inspection of the defense wing, Lyria crossed paths with Elias again. He bowed politely, his voice calm. "Your Highness," she nodded nervously. "Captain Ward." For a long moment neither spoke. The sound of distant machines filled the silence between them. Finally, Lyria found the courage to ask, "Do humans ever stop fighting?" He looked at her, surprised by the question. Then he answered quietly, "We try, but the universe keeps finding new ways to make us pick up our weapons again." She frowned. "That sounds lonely." Elias gave a faint smile. "It is. But loneliness is the price of keeping others safe." His words pierced her heart. She wanted to say something kind, something that could ease the sadness in his tone, but before she could, a messenger called for her. Duty pulled her away once more. That night she dreamt of him, standing in the smoke of battle, reaching out to her through fire and light. When she awoke, her cheeks were wet with tears she didn't understand. In the following days, she began to notice small things. How he always stood where the danger would come first. How he never took food until everyone else had eaten. How he spoke to the youngest servants with quiet respect. He wasn't the monster she had imagined. He was something rarer, a protector who carried his guilt like armor. But fear still lived in her heart. Not fear of him anymore, but fear for him, because she could sense that Elias Ward was the kind of man who would give his life without hesitation. And though she barely knew him, the thought of losing him made her chest ache in ways she didn't want to admit. Under the silver glow of the twin moons, Princess Lyria whispered softly to herself, "Why am I so afraid of someone who has already suffered more than I ever will?" She didn't yet know the answer, but her heart had already begun to change. The day of celebration began with light and laughter. The royal palace buzzed with music as banners of silver and blue hung from the high walls. The Zalaran Empire had completed its great peace treaty with the Terran Federation, and today the signing would be made public. It was meant to be a day of hope, the beginning of unity between two powerful races. Princess Lyria stood beside her father on the grand balcony that overlooked the crowd. Thousands of citizens filled the courtyard below, their glowing eyes lifted toward the stage. Soldiers lined the walls, and above them, hovering ships shimmered like stars in daylight. Elias Ward stood behind the royal family, quiet as ever, his armor polished and ready. He wore no crown, no medals, and only his Terran insignia on his chest and a sword strapped to his side. His sharp gaze moved constantly, watching every corner, every shadow. Lyria glanced at him once. Even surrounded by alien guards, the human looked alone, like a stone standing in the river's flow. The Emperor raised his hand to speak. His deep voice echoed across the courtyard. Today marks the end of fear between our worlds. May peace rise from the ashes of war. The crowd cheered, their voices blending like music. But then a sound broke through it. A sharp metallic click. Elias's head snapped toward the noise. His instinct screamed. He saw it, a small glint of metal on a nearby rooftop. "Get down!" he shouted. The explosion hit a heartbeat later. The balcony shook violently as fire erupted in the air. The blast tore through guards, ripping the banners apart. The Emperor fell back as shards of energy burned across the marble floor. Lyria screamed as flames surged toward her. But before she could move, Elias was already there. He grabbed her, wrapping his body around hers, pulling her down behind the broken wall. The heat struck his back, burning through his armor. Pain shot through him, but he didn't let go. When the smoke cleared, he slowly lifted his head. His armor was cracked, his skin scorched, but his arm still shielded her. "Are you hurt, Princess?" His voice was rough, breath heavy. Lyria's heart pounded as she looked up at him. His back was smoking, his face cut by shrapnel, yet his eyes were calm, focused only on her. You took the fire for me," she whispered. He gave a faint, tired smile. "It's what I do." He pushed himself up, ignoring the pain. The enemy wasn't gone. Across the rooftops, shadowed figures reloaded their weapons. "Stay down," he ordered, then drew his sword, a shining blade of Terran steel, and leapt forward into the chaos. The guards tried to follow, but Elias moved faster. He dodged plasma bolts, rolled under the blast, and struck with deadly precision. Every movement was clean, efficient, controlled. A lifetime of battle condensed into seconds. When the last attacker fell, silence returned, broken only by the distant crackle of fire. The smell of smoke filled the air. Elias dropped to one knee, exhaustion washing over him. Blood ran down his arm, staining the marble floor. Lyria rushed toward him, ignoring her father's calls. She knelt beside him, tears in her eyes. "You're hurt. I'll live," he said softly. His lips curved into a small, almost peaceful smile. "I've been through worse." She reached for his hand. It was warm, trembling, and covered in ash. She had never touched a human before, but now she held the hand that had saved her life. Her fear melted away, replaced by something deeper, something fragile and new. Behind them, the Emperor's guards carried away the wounded, and the royal physician called for help. But Lyria didn't move. She couldn't look away from Elias. In that single moment, the monster of her nightmares had become her protector, the living proof that strength and kindness could exist in the same heart. As they carried him to the infirmary, she whispered under her breath, "You were supposed to be the one I feared, not the one I couldn't bear to lose." The fire that nearly killed her had also burned away her fear, and from its ashes, something else began to rise, something that neither war nor peace had ever prepared her for. The palace was quiet after the attack. The broken walls had been repaired, the smoke had cleared, and the soldiers had returned to their posts. But a strange silence still lingered. It was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of people who had come face to face with death. In the royal infirmary, Captain Elias Ward lay on a white bed, his armor removed and his back wrapped in bandages. His wounds burned, but he didn't complain. He had known far worse pain. What troubled him more than the injury was the thought of the princess's terrified face during the explosion. He had seen fear in many eyes, but hers had been different. It wasn't just fear for herself, it was fear for him too. The door opened softly. Lyria stepped inside, carrying a small bowl of glowing blue liquid, Zelaran healing medicine. The guards at the door bowed as she entered, but she waved them away. Elias tried to sit up, but she raised her hand gently. "Don't move. You'll tear the bandages." Her voice trembled slightly. She wasn't used to being this close to him. The room smelled of antiseptic herbs and faint smoke from burned armor. "I came to thank you," she said quietly. "You saved my life." Elias looked at her with calm eyes. "It's my duty, Princess," she frowned. "No, it was more than duty. You were on fire, Elias. You could have died." He smiled faintly, his voice low and rough. "Wouldn't be the first time I almost did." Her chest tightened. There was a deep sadness behind his quiet humor, the kind of sadness born from too many years of loss. She dipped a cloth into the healing liquid and gently pressed it against his shoulder. He winced slightly. "You don't have to do that, Your Highness." "I know," she whispered, continuing to clean the burns. "But I want to." For a long while neither spoke. The sound of her careful hands moving, the soft drip of medicine. It filled the silence with something almost peaceful. After a while she asked, "Does it hurt much?" He gave a half smile. "Pain reminds me I'm still alive." Lyria looked at him, surprised by his words. "You speak as if being alive is something rare." He met her gaze. "For soldiers it is," her heart ached. She had grown up in safety, surrounded by luxury and respect. He had grown up in war, surrounded by smoke and loss. Yet somehow, sitting here beside him, she felt smaller. Not in power, but in understanding. "Why do you keep fighting?" she asked softly. "Even when it hurts?" Elias's eyes drifted to the window, where twin moons shone in the dark sky. "Because someone has to. Because if we stop fighting, the ones who can't fight will pay the price." Lyria fell silent. There was strength in his words, but also loneliness. She wondered how many friends he had buried, how many times he had stood between death and the people he protected. She changed the bandage and placed her hand lightly on his arm. "You don't always have to carry everything alone, you know." For the first time, his expression softened completely. "That's kind of you to say, Princess. But humans, we're built to carry weight. It's what we do best." Her lips curved into a small, sad smile. "And that's what makes you dangerous, isn't it? You carry pain until it becomes strength." He chuckled quietly. "Something like that." Before leaving, she hesitated by the door. "Captain?" "Yes, Princess?" Her voice was gentle, almost shy. "When I first saw you, I was afraid. I thought you were a monster." He looked down for a moment. "You weren't wrong," he said softly. "I've done things that would make any monster weep." Tears filled her eyes, but she shook her head. "No, you're not a monster, Elias. You're the reason I'm still alive." He said nothing, but the faintest smile touched his lips. That night, as she returned to her chambers, Lyria realized something had changed. Her fear was gone, replaced by something deeper, something she couldn't name yet. And in the infirmary, Elias sat alone under the pale moonlight, staring at the stars beyond the window. For the first time in many years, he allowed himself a small thought, a dangerous, human thought. Maybe there was still something left worth living for. Weeks passed, and the palace slowly returned to normal. The people of Zelara began to smile again, comforted by the promise of peace. But peace never lasted long in the galaxy. Somewhere beyond the border stars, danger was stirring once more. The news came one quiet evening. A messenger rushed into the Emperor's hall, his voice trembling. "Your Majesty, the Rithari rebellion has begun. Their fleets are moving toward our outer colonies." The council erupted in panic. The Rithari were enemies of both humans and Zelarians, ruthless, cold, and eager to destroy the new alliance. They saw peace as weakness. The Emperor turned toward Elias, who stood silently near the throne. "Captain Ward, our defense forces are not ready. We need time. Can you hold them off?" Elias bowed deeply. "I can, Your Majesty. But I'll need every ship you can spare, and your trust." Lyria's heart dropped. "You can't go alone," she said quickly. He met her eyes, calm but serious. "I won't be alone, Princess. I'll have your people beside me." Her voice shook. "That's not what I meant," he smiled faintly. "I know." The following morning, the human captain prepared for war once again. The landing bay roared with engines and the smell of metal and fuel. Soldiers saluted him as he passed, but Lyria stood apart, watching quietly from the shadows. When he noticed her, he stopped. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. "I had to see you," she whispered, stepping closer. "You just healed. Your wounds are still fresh." He looked down at his bandaged hand. "They'll hold." "You always say that," she said, tears shining in her eyes.
"Why must you always run toward danger?"
He took a slow breath. "Because someone has to stand between it and you." Her voice trembled. "Elias, you've already saved me once. You don't owe me anything." He smiled, tired, gentle, and full of something she couldn't name. "Maybe I do. Maybe I owe you the chance to live without fear." She reached for his hand, her smaller fingers wrapped around his scarred ones. "Promise me you'll come back," he hesitated. "I'll try." "No," she said firmly. "Promise me." His eyes softened. "All right, Princess. I promise." But deep inside, both of them knew. Promises made before battle are the ones destiny rarely keeps. When the ships lifted off, the sky turned red from the engines. Lyria watched until the last light disappeared into the stars. Days turned into nights. The war spread fast. Reports came from the front lines. Brutal fights destroyed colonies and countless lives lost. But one name echoed through every transmission: the human commander. They said he fought like a storm, fearless and unyielding. His ship was always the first to arrive and the last to retreat. He saved thousands, sacrificing sleep, food, and even his blood. And yet, no one fought harder than Elias Ward. Back in the palace, Lyria waited by the communication chamber every night, listening to every message, hoping to hear his voice. Her father told her not to worry, but she could see the fear in his eyes too. Then one day the final message came. The fleet had won. The Rethari rebellion crushed. Peace restored once again. But in the list of survivors, his name was missing. The princess froze. Her heart felt hollow. She read the report again and again, but the result never changed. Captain Elias Ward, missing in action. Her hands trembled. "No," she whispered. "He promised." She refused to believe it. For days she searched for answers, calling every outpost, sending messages across the stars. But no one had seen him since the final battle. His ship had been last seen diving into the enemy's core vessel. And then, nothing. At night she stood on her balcony, the wind cold against her face. She looked at the sky where the stars shimmered faintly, whispering through her tears. "You kept your promise, didn't you? You saved us, even if it cost you everything." Far beyond her world, among the quiet ruins of a shattered battlefield, a single Terran sword was buried in the ground, its metal glowing faintly under the alien suns. The man who wielded it was gone. But his courage remained, and in her heart, Lyria finally understood the truth her father once told her. Those who have seen death up close are often the ones who protect life the most. Months passed since the war ended. The stars over Zalara shone brighter than ever, but for Princess Lyria the sky had never felt so empty. Every night she stood by her balcony, her eyes tracing the constellations. Somewhere among them she imagined his ship, broken, drifting yet still carrying his spirit. The wind that brushed her face sometimes felt warm, almost like his hand. The galaxy called him a hero. The songs of both humans and Zalarians spoke of the human warrior who defended peace. Monuments were built, stories told. Children repeated his name with pride. But for Lyria, he wasn't just a hero. He was a man who smiled despite pain, who protected her even when she feared him, and who promised he would return. Her father, Emperor Kael, often watched her from afar. He knew what she had lost. He had once doubted humans, but Elias Ward had changed even his heart. He was more than a soldier, the Emperor once said softly. He was a bridge between worlds. One day, a message arrived from a distant human outpost. It was heavily damaged data, a fragment recovered from space near the final battlefield. The Emperor immediately brought it to his daughter. "It's from his ship," he said quietly. "Our engineers repaired what they could." Lyria's heart pounded as she opened the file. The screen flickered, and then his voice filled the room. "Princess Lyria," came Elias's tired but steady tone. "If you're hearing this, I guess I didn't make it back. I'm sorry." Her eyes filled with tears as his voice continued. "The battle got worse than expected. The enemy core wouldn't fall, so I had to make sure it couldn't rise again. Don't be angry, all right? This was my choice." He paused, breathing raggedly. "You once told me to promise I'd come back. I can't do that now. But I promise you this. I'll always be watching over you wherever I end up." There was a long silence. Then he said something softer, almost like a whisper meant only for her. "You changed me, Lyria. You taught me that fear isn't weakness. It's proof of what we love. Don't let anyone make you hide that. Lead your people with that same heart and never forget, even a human's life is worth something if it protects someone like you." The message ended. For a long moment she couldn't move. The tears came silently, not of despair but of pride and love. She pressed her hand against the screen and whispered, "You did come back, Elias, just not the way I hoped." After that day the princess changed. She no longer hid behind her royal walls. She began visiting the border colonies, meeting people from both species, speaking of unity and courage. Wherever she went, she told stories of the man who taught her not to fear the unknown. One evening, years later, the Emperor led her to the royal gardens. There at the center stood a new monument, a tall black stone carved in the shape of a sword's hilt, with the inscription, "Captain Elias Ward, the human who fought for every world." Lyria stood before it, her hands trembling. Around her, thousands of citizens gathered, both human and alien, bowing their heads in respect. As the ceremony ended, a warm breeze moved through the trees. A single petal drifted down, landing softly on her palm. She looked up, smiling through her tears. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind. "You kept your promise after all." From that day, peace between humans and Zalarians remained unbroken. The alliance grew stronger, guided by the memory of one brave human who crossed the stars not for power, but for love and for hope. And though centuries would pass every time the night fell on Zalara, the princess's descendants would look at the brightest star in the sky, the one humans called Ward's Light, and remember the warrior who once made even an alien princess cry out, "Not him, father. I'm afraid of that human warrior." But in the end, that same warrior became the reason her world learned what humanity truly meant. Because sometimes, the most terrifying thing in the universe is not human strength. It's a human heart that dares to love.